Hello. I hope you're having a happy holiday, enjoying yourself, relaxing, not grading, not lesson planning, putting all of that aside and doing something you love. I know you love teaching. I know you love grading. No, you don't. Maybe lesson planning. Maybe you're doing that. It's okay. Whatever you're doing, I hope you're loving your time off. Today, we are talking about another topic that kids need no matter what the future brings. Today, we're talking about critical thinking. So in this series of the latest episodes on this podcast, the Empower Students Now podcast, I'm your host, Amanda Werner. I have a website, amandarightnow.com, if you're looking for engaging games or lessons or units. I have it. I have things for you. So go look on my website for those things. But in this latest series, we are exploring just the skills that I believe are most important for students to have in the future. And today we are talking about one that many of the leaders of our country maybe lack. And that skill is critical thinking. And maybe some of the citizens of this country are a bit lacking in that. Maybe I even am. Okay, I'm not gonna point any fingers until I point it at myself. I struggle with this too. Critical thinking. And I think part of the reason I struggle with it is because I'm such a passionate person. And I get really convinced of things, especially if they sound like they align with what I believe. You know what I mean? So I think this is not only a skill that kids need, it's a skill that adults need a refresher in too. All right, so let's talk about it in this episode right now. Welcome to the Empower Students Now podcast, a podcast about equity, neurodiversity, mindfulness, and student engagement. There's a lot that needs to change in our education system. The good news is teachers have the power to make these changes now. Let's start by saying what critical thinking is not, okay? Before I define what critical thinking is, let's talk about what it's not. So it kind of sounds like, and kids might get confused too, so you might want to speak to this. It kind of sounds like criticizing, and it sounds a little bit negative, doesn't it? So it's not criticizing, and it's not being super negative. So you might want to speak to kids about that misconception because it kind of sounds critical, right? Critical, criticize. They're related, those words, but that's not what it's about. It's not about being a contrarian just for the sake of being a contrarian. It's not about, dismissing ideas that we don't like. That's not what it's about. What it is about, what critical thinking is it's asking good questions. And I'm going to talk about 5 questions in this episode that we all need to be asking over and over again when we encounter information online. And again, I do think that adults need this as well, including myself. Okay. So, it's also about just examining information carefully before accepting it as true or fact, or credible. It's about recognizing our own biases and being willing to change. This is so key. Being willing to change our minds when evidence points in a different direction than what we previously thought, right? And that's really hard. To be able to change our mind, to be able to see another point of view, that's hard. It's really hard, especially if it's an affront to what we believe. So here's like a classroom scenario that might sound familiar, right? So a student is scrolling through their social media, and this might not even be, a scenario that a student faces. This is like, you could face this, right? But you're scrolling through social media and you see some sort of text, right? Like a headline that gets you upset. It makes you angry. And it might even confirm something you already suspected or already knew. And your immediate reaction is to share it with others, right? Or like it. And I've done this so many times, right? You see something and you think it's important and it gets you really on fire and you think other people need to know about it. But, and students encounter this all the time. If a student experiences this, when they experience this, this is the point when critical thinking needs to come online, right? In adults' minds too. So you need to ask, who wrote this? What's their source? Is there another side to this story, even if it conflicts with your own beliefs? What am I feeling right now about this topic? And is this feeling clouding my judgment? So these are all really important questions to ask ourselves when we encounter information online that triggers us. So what makes this so challenging is that we are bombarded with information nonstop. We live in an information overload time period. It's really, really unhealthy, the amount of information that we have access to. And not only that, everyone's talking about these algorithms, right, that feed us content that confirms what we already believe. And that's pretty creepy too. So these headlines are engineered to trigger emotional reactions. And then you get emotional, you share it, and then this misinformation is spread faster, and then they're thought of as facts. And then it just becomes more and more compelling and more shared. And our students and us, we're all navigating this every single day. And we're being asked to distinguish between reliable sources, credible sources, fake news, propaganda, what's a fact, what's an opinion, what's correlation versus causation, right? We're having to do this all day long. And so I think that this topic should be an entire unit. And maybe I will make a unit on this. Message me if you want a unit on this, because I definitely think that I could spend some time making something for you. But for now, I just have this slideshow that you can get by going to the show notes. You can get a copy of it, and it's a student-facing slideshow, so you can teach these concepts about critical thinking. Like, what is it? What are some key like questions you can ask? These kinds of things. Everything that's in this episode is in that slideshow. Okay, so how do we help kids in this information age? And not just by asking very vague questions like, is this true? But asking actionable questions that can be answered more quickly. So first of all, who is telling me this? Who wrote this? I mean, I don't know. Our kids, one time I asked, and this happens a lot, like you ask kids where they got their information from, like if you're in the middle of a discussion or they cited some source or whatever, and they forgot to, use their MLA in-text citation or whatever. And you ask them where they got their source and they say Google. That is not a source. That's a search engine. I feel like that I wrote that quote one year and put it on my classroom wall because kids were saying that so often. And so like, how do they dig deeper to find out who is this information from? Is it from a website? Is it from an article? Is it from a blog? And then also, what is that person who wrote this or telling this information or spreading this information or making this YouTube video, whatever it is, what might they gain from me believing the information? So, because everyone has a perspective, right? And everyone has motive for what they're posting online. So, for example, a news organization, if the piece of information is from a news organization, um, then I mean that news organization is wanting clicks, right? They are trying to write headlines that will be clicked on, and they're trying to make money, right? Politicians want citizens to vote for them. Companies like, all these Amazon and OpenAI and, the company that runs ChatGPT, like they want sales, they want money, they want people using their platform. And so helping kids understand that someone's incentives, figuring out what does this person get out of posting this, that kind of helps you evaluate the source of information. And then second, this is the second question that's important. What evidence is being presented? And is it actually relevant to the topic? So students need to learn the difference between an anecdote, like a story from someone's life versus data. And not all research is equal, right? Like not all research studies, just because something is from a scientific paper doesn't mean that it's fact, like valid. Like some studies have been, like a lot of, especially psychological, like studies within the psychology field, a lot of them have been debunked. Like so there's certain things that like was quote unquote researched, but then when you looked at like, was that research, was it able to be replicated? Like well, I can't say that. Replicable studies. Like, was the study like done by other groups of people to verify it, right? And you can like look, like if you dig deep enough, you can find sources, right? Like, especially if you're reading an article on a website and they cite their sources, you can go and click over to where they got their information. And so kids need to like practice doing that. You know what I mean? So they need to practice figuring out like, where is this, if there is data, where did it come from? And like, what was this study? How was it conducted? I mean, they could dig that deep, especially if they're in high school. Third, this is an important, very, 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 very important question. What is missing from this story, this article, this post, this video, whatever? This is huge. Critical thinking isn't just about evaluating what's in front of you. It's about asking, well, what's not in front of me? What is this person not including in this information? What context is being left out? What counter arguments exist that aren't being mentioned? And that can tell you a lot, answering that question. I actually have sort of a tangent that I'd love to go on right now. You won't mind, will you? So I just read this book. And I think it's kind of an older book. I should look up when it was published. It's called What Happened to You? And I'm actually looking up the authors because, well, one of the authors was Oprah Winfrey. And another one was a doctor. I'm looking up his name right now, Dr. Bruce D. Perry. And this whole book is about trauma. And this doctor is very, very experienced and well-versed in the research behind trauma, specifically in kids. So it was really an interesting read. And I loved a lot of this book. I really did. I thought there was a lot, they used a lot of stories from like people that Oprah interviewed and different patients that this doctor had. And everything that they were saying really resonated with me about how it's important not to force kids to talk about traumatizing experiences, and that it's important to give kids choice, and it's important for kids to have connected relationships. And I agree with all of this. But over and over again, this doctor kept talking about how so many kids who are traumatized, and their symptoms, people aren't reading their symptoms as trauma. They're not looking into the history of the child. They're just diagnosing them with ADHD and giving them medication. And so he says over and over again, these kids are over medicated and they're just diagnosed with ADHD. And I feel like it was a slippery slope, because I'm sure that happens. I'm sure he's right in some cases. Some kids are misdiagnosed with ADHD, but also, isn't it the reverse? Can't some kids be diagnosed with, oh, they just experienced a traumatic event, and I don't want my kid to, be medicated or over medicated, even though there's studies that show that stimulants help decrease addiction and all sorts of chronic health problems like diabetes and stuff because of impulse control issues in people with ADHD. And so stimulants actually decrease the risk of a lot of health problems and depression and addiction. But this guy in his book is saying, oh, actually, and so he's giving the people, parents and teachers, this idea that, oh, it's all about trauma. That's what this is about. It's not ADHD. And so the reason I'm going on this tangent is because I feel like what's missing from this book, which sounded very relevant and reasonable and resonated with me, was the point of view of a kid who actually does have ADHD or autism, and their symptoms seem like maybe they have PTSD when actually it's more of a neurological condition, right? And so this is just an example, like one recent example. This is a book I just finished today, actually, so it just came to mind. Okay, fourth, how does this make me feel? And is that feeling influencing my judgment? We like to think we're rational, but we're not. We're very emotional beings. Our emotions shape how we process information. So teaching students to notice their emotional reactions and account for them is a critical thinking skill. And so while I was reading this book, I was feeling a lot of strong emotions, and I was thinking, yes, 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 this is so good. This is such important information. But then there were parts of the book that made me feel kind of guilty, because they were talking about like how much kids use screens and how adults, when they're just constantly on their phones, how traumatic that can be for a kid who feels disconnected from their parent, and, just kind of like shaming parents who use their cell phones a lot. And so I did have a lot of feelings reading this book and just paying attention to those and realizing that those might be kind of red flags that this book is missing pieces of the puzzle, even though it's a great book and has really important points. Okay. And then fifth, am I willing to be wrong about this? This might be the most important question of all. If you're not willing to change your mind in the face of new evidence, you're not thinking critically. You're defending a position. So I wonder if this author, if I wrote him, Bruce D. Perry and Oprah Winfrey, and I said, hey, you're kind of missing some stuff about neurodivergence. And I don't know, like it's missing from your book. What do you guys think of that? Can you hear another point of view? And they want to have a conversation with me. They probably don't. They're probably on to new things. I don't know when this book was published. But then that means that they are willing to kind of to pivot and update their book and their research and update their thinking about all of this. And maybe they already have, who knows? I feel like this book was published a long time ago, 2021, 4 years ago. So I don't know. We'll see. So I'm going to wrap this episode up by just telling you some things you can do to teach the topic of critical thinking. So first of all, realize that this is a practice. It's something you have to do a lot. It's not like a trait that you just are born with, right? Some students, some students and adults are naturally skeptical, right? And that's actually can be a good trait to have for critical thinking. But skepticism can get you in trouble too, because if you just constantly are just closed off to new information, that can cause cynicism, right? And it's not really being open to other points of view, which is part of critical thinking. So it's something you can become disciplined in. It's something we have to teach and we have to practice. So what does it look like when you practice it? So when you're teaching content in your classroom, you can share your own thinking process. So you can say things like, I read this in one source, but I wanted to verify it. So I checked 2 other sources. Or I used to believe X and then I learned Y. And so I revised my thinking. So let students see the critical thinking by talking out loud about your own process. You also want to create opportunities for students to practice this. So don't just ask them what they think, ask them how they know what they think, ask them to provide evidence or go search evidence, find actual authors' names rather than just citing Google or ChatGPT. Make questioning a normal part of your classroom discussion procedure, right? Questioning is really important. Third, teach students the tools. So show them how to evaluate sources, teach them about logical fallacies, teach them about like the difference between a fact, an interpretation of a fact or an opinion, and an opinion. Give them frameworks so they can use these different topics on their own, right? Like they can reference maybe a poster you have that's about facts, interpretations, and opinions, so they can kind of use it independently. You also want to make it safe to be wrong. This is really important because admitting that you're uncertain or you might be changing your mind, it might feel really hard because it might make you look weak, but that's actually really brave to say, I don't know, or I was wrong, or maybe my thinking is changing. And modeling that, it's called intellectual honesty. It's not failure. And so the bottom line is one of the most important skills that we can give our students, and one of the hardest to teach, is critical thinking and questioning our own beliefs and assumptions. We can't teach students to think critically while we ourselves are accepting information uncritically. We can't teach them to change their minds when evidence shifts if we're unwilling to model that same flexibility. We can't teach them to ask hard questions if we punish them for asking hard questions of us. Teaching critical thinking is an act of intellectual humility. It's saying to our students, here's how we figure out what's true. And yes, that means sometimes we're going to discover that we're wrong. And that's okay. Because in the end, critical thinking isn't about being right. It's about having a reliable process for getting closer to the truth. And that's a skill that will serve our students no matter what future they're walking into. Thanks for listening. Next time, we'll explore another essential skill our students need. Until then, here's your question to sit with. When was the last time you changed your mind about something because of new evidence presented to you or that you found? What would it look like to share that experience with your students? Thanks for listening. Share this with someone you think would benefit from it. Bye.